What would you do if the only thing standing between you and a life-changing opportunity was a single, silent choice? One no one would ever see. Clara Whitmore, a soft-spoken young woman from rural Kentucky, arrived at the doorstep of one of the most prestigious scholarship programs in the country. She wore a second-hand shirt, carried a canvas bag, and didn't even own a laptop. In a room full of polished resumes and confident voices, she was the one they laughed at. But then came the test, not of knowledge, but of character. What would you choose if they handed you someone else's future and told you you decide what happens to them? No one will know but you. Would you play fair if playing fair meant losing your shot? This isn't just a story about scholarships or success. It's about what defines us when no one is watching. Take a breath, step into the barn-turned classroom, and meet the girl who changed everything. Not by standing out, but by standing firm. If this story already has you curious, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The sun had barely crept over the horizon when Clara Whitmore tightened the strap of her canvas bag, kissed her grandmother on the cheek, and stepped off the wooden porch of their weathered farmhouse in Elmsworth, Kentucky. The grass was damp with dew, a rooster crowed in the distance, and the faint scent of earth and wildflowers clung to the morning air. Clara's shoes, though scuffed and faded, moved with quiet purpose across the gravel path that led to the old bicycle she'd borrowed from her neighbor, Mr. Dillard. The front tire wobbled slightly, but it would get her to the bus station on time if the road didn't betray her. Inside her bag, one change of clothes, a notebook filled with handwritten notes, and a second-hand copy of Leadership and Ethics in the Modern World. No laptop, no makeup, no power suit. Just Clara. Her mother, June, stood in the kitchen doorway holding a thermos of coffee, wrapped in an old dish towel. "Don't forget to eat when you get there," she called out. Clara turned, her voice steady but soft. "I will. Love you." Her mother gave a nod, but her eyes lingered longer than usual. Behind her, Clara's little brother, Henry, peeked from behind the doorframe with sleep-mussed hair and a blanket around his shoulders. "You're gonna win," he mumbled. Clara smiled. "I'm just going to try." The scholarship was no ordinary one. The Holland Tech Foundation grant was one of the most competitive in the country, rumored to be backed by a billionaire tech founder who'd never been seen in public. No website listed his photo, no interviews, just stories. Stories of a man who once built a satellite company in his garage, then vanished from headlines and lived on a ranch in Colorado while funding education initiatives anonymously. The foundation's motto, "Build Quiet Power." Clara had read it 100 times. She hadn't told anyone except her family that she applied, not her professors, not her classmates, and definitely not the part-time manager at the diner where she waitressed evenings. The essay had taken her weeks. The application required no resume, just answers to 5 open-ended questions about character, leadership, and ethics. She wasn't sure what they saw in her, but they invited her to Chicago for the final round. That meant something. The bus ride was long, 12 hours across hills and flatlands. She sat by the window, her bag clutched to her chest like a shield. At a gas station stop in Indiana, she bought a sandwich and a bottle of water with her tip money, counting each dollar carefully. At one point, as fields blurred past the window, Clara pulled out her notebook and reread her opening line from the scholarship essay, "Integrity isn't a medal on your chest. It's the choice you make when the room is empty and no one will ever know." She'd written it late one night after Henry had fallen asleep on the couch, using a candle when the power had gone out again. It wasn't profound. It was just honest. As the city skyline began to take shape in the distance, her stomach knotted. The buildings were taller than anything she'd ever seen. Everything looked polished, efficient, sharp. She looked down at her clothes, clean, ironed, but clearly worn. The collar of her button-up shirt was slightly frayed. The canvas bag on her lap was faded, the stitching along the seams coming loose. She thought of turning back. Just for a second. This was a mistake. Her mind whispered, "You'll be out of place, out of your league." Then she heard her grandmother's voice in her head. "The world may not be fair, but you can be." Clara exhaled, sat up straighter. When the bus pulled into the station, she stepped off. adjusted her bag, and whispered quietly to herself, "I belong where my choices take me." She hailed a cab with the little money she had left and gave the driver the address listed in the email, Holland Tech Headquarters, Riverfront Plaza, Chicago. The city roared around her sirens, chatter, the low hum of traffic and ambition. But inside, Clara was calm. Tomorrow would be the interview. But today, she arrived, quietly, fully, herself. The morning light filtered through the towering glass windows of Holland Tech's headquarters in downtown Chicago. It caught the shine of patent leather shoes, the gleam of silver cufflinks, and the high-gloss finish of a world polished to near perfection. Clara Whitmore stood in the atrium, her shoes damp from a short walk in the morning drizzle. Her fingers gripped the strap of her canvas bag, her eyes tracing the names etched on a metal wall plaque, Holland Tech Foundation, a future built on quiet power. The lobby buzzed with confidence. Young men and women, sharply dressed in tailored suits, moved with the easy certainty of those who had been in such spaces before. Most had MacBooks open across their laps, typing rapidly or reviewing slides. The air smelled faintly of cologne, ambition, and expensive coffee. Clara stepped aside, instinctively moving toward a corner where a large indoor plant offered a sliver of cover. She sat on the edge of a cushioned bench, pulling out her notebook. Its edges were bent, some pages dog-eared. Her pen hovered in her hand as she tried to ignore the glances drifting her way. A voice nearby chuckled, not loud, but sharp enough to sting. Is she here for the janitor orientation? A girl with perfectly curled blonde hair, no older than Clara, whispered to her seatmate. She wore a cream pantsuit, heels too tall for comfort, and carried a Louis Vuitton tote. The boy beside her smirked. Maybe it's Bring Your Local Librarian Day. They both laughed quietly. Clara heard them. She didn't look up. Across the room, a group of 4 candidates clustered near the coffee station. One of them, a tall guy with slicked back hair and a navy blue blazer, stole a glance at Clara and leaned toward his group. "She's writing on paper," he said with mock shock. "What is this?" 2005. Another chimed in. "Maybe she thinks this is an essay contest." They chuckled as if the room were their stage and Clara merely part of the backdrop. Still, she didn't respond. Instead, she adjusted the corner of her sleeve and wrote a simple note to herself. "They don't know me. That's not their fault. But I know me. That's what matters." The silence Clara carried was not emptiness. It was resolve. It had been shaped over years of late-night study under dim lights, of waiting tables and helping her brother with homework, of saying no to things she wanted so her family could have what they needed. She had walked into this building with no armor, except honesty. And if that wasn't enough, she wasn't sure she wanted to be part of whatever waited beyond those doors. Still, a quiet fire stirred inside her. A staff member emerged from a side corridor, wearing a sleek gray name tag that read, "Lena, Program Coordinator." She clapped her hands once, getting the attention of the room. "Good morning, everyone. If you're here for the final round of the Holland Tech Foundation Scholarship, please follow me." Clara rose with the others, tucking her notebook into her bag. The hallway they entered was long, lined with framed photos of past recipients, faces beaming beside startup logos, white coats, books published. As the line moved, Clara felt her pulse rise. This place was built for people like them, not like her. One candidate behind her muttered under his breath, "Wonder how many legacy kids are in this group." Another whispered back, "Better question who let that girl from the lobby through Clara's steps," slowed for just a second. Her throat tightened. But then she remembered her mother's voice the night before she left. You don't have to match them to matter. You just have to show up with your whole self. The group entered a modern conference hall, walls of glass overlooking the river, sunlight spilling across the floor. Each seat had a name card. Clara's was at the far end, isolated from the central cluster. She sat down quietly, arranging her pen and notebook in front of her. A woman a few seats down glanced over, wrinkled her nose, and leaned toward the man next to her. She brought a pen. He smirked. "Let's just hope she knows how to spell blockchain." Clara's cheeks flushed, but she kept her eyes on her notes. As Lena explained the scheduled morning interviews, group discussion, then a surprise task in the afternoon. Clara folded her hands in her lap and listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't perform. She didn't charm. But she was watching. Every glance, every whisper, every smirk. And she recorded them not in bitterness, but as fuel. You don't need a suit to speak truth. You just need a spine. She reminded herself again. The first impression they had of her wasn't kind, but it wouldn't be the last one. The morning interviews passed like distant thunder, long, echoing, and impossible to hold on to. Clara answered each question with poise, even as panelists raised their brows at her lack of formal presentation materials. While others clicked through slick slide decks, Clara opened her worn notebook and spoke from memory. Some smirked, some dismissed her before she spoke, but some listened, and that, for now, was enough. After lunch, small sandwiches and bitter coffee served in minimalist trays, the candidates were ushered into a smaller, more intimate room. The walls were lined with shelves of books, real books, titles on leadership, ethics, innovation, and social reform. It smelled faintly of paper and time. A man in a charcoal vest, mid-30s, polished, unreadable, entered, holding a stack of large envelopes. He laid them on the table. "This is not a test of intelligence," he said. Voice crisp. "It is a test of judgment." The room stilled. "Inside these envelopes," he continued, "you'll find the application of a fellow candidate. It has been anonymized. You will be asked to review it privately and submit a simple form, recommend, neutral, or not recommended." A girl across the table leaned forward, confused. "You're asking us to evaluate each other?" "No," the man replied evenly. "We're asking you to evaluate a stranger. You won't know whose file you hold, what you choose to do with it. Is your own..." He paused. "But be aware this is part of your score." He left the room. A staff member handed each candidate an envelope. Clara stared at hers, her name scrawled across the front in black ink. She opened it slowly. Inside, a printed application, essay answers, a partial transcript, and a one-page project proposal titled Mobile Tech Labs for Rural Communities. Clara's heart skipped. The writing style felt familiar. She read on. There it was, a small typo in the second paragraph, a missing date on the last page, a proposal that, while passionate, lacked formal structure. But the voice in the essay, honest, hopeful, spoke of growing up in rural Iowa, teaching coding to local kids with no internet access. The writer had built a program using donated Chromebooks and ran it from a church basement. Clara's throat tightened. Whoever this was, they weren't unlike her. She looked at the form beside her. One checkbox, one decision. Across the room, pens scratched paper. Whispers hummed under breath. One boy chuckled. "Too easy. They gave me someone who can't even spell algorithm." Another muttered, "Not gonna lie, I need this scholarship more than they do." Clara looked back down. Not recommended. 3 words. One click of a pen. No one would ever know. If she marked that box, the file would likely be tossed. Her competition reduced by 1. Her fingers hovered. She closed her eyes. And in the stillness, a voice rose in her memory, her grandmother again. "You can't control the room, Clara, but you can control your choice." She opened her eyes, picked up her pen, and wrote a note at the bottom of the evaluation. "This candidate may lack polish, but the heart behind this application is rare. I recommend a second review. There's something real here." She checked the box, recommend, then folded the form and placed it back in the envelope. No one applauded. No one even looked her way. But in her chest, something steady and warm took root. That evening, as the candidates waited in a lounge filled with soft lighting and low jazz, whispers began to circulate. I heard some people got disqualified. Someone tried to delete a file from the foundation system. They're watching everything. Clara sat quietly near a window, the city glowing outside. She watched the river curve under the bridges, the lights reflecting like small fires. She had no idea what her decision meant, if it had helped her or hurt her, if it would even matter, but she knew this. She didn't come here to win by erasing someone else. Later, as the candidates were dismissed for the night, Lena, the program coordinator, caught Clara by the arm gently. "Miss Whitmore," she said, her voice unreadable. "Mr. Camden would like to see you. Now, if you have a moment." Clara blinked. "Who's Mr. Camden?" Lena smiled faintly. "Someone who pays close attention." Clara followed Lena down a quiet hallway, her steps soft against the slate-gray carpet. The ambient noise of conversation and laughter from the lounge faded with each turn. The lighting here was softer, warmer, less corporate. A corridor for people with keys to doors no one else knew existed. At the end stood a wooden door, no plaque, no label. Lena knocked twice, then opened it. "Mr. Camden," she said gently. "Miss Whitmore." Clara stepped in. The room surprised her. No skyline view, no high-tech displays, just shelves of books, a heavy oak desk, and 2 leather chairs. A kettle steamed quietly on a side table beside a tray of china teacups. The man standing by the window turned slowly. He wasn't what Clara expected, mid-50s, tall but relaxed in posture, dressed in a wool cardigan and charcoal slacks. His hair was mostly silver, trimmed neatly, and his face bore no trace of arrogance, just age, thought, and the quiet intensity of someone who asked more questions than he answered. "Miss Whitmore," he said with a nod. "I appreciate you coming." Clara offered a cautious smile. "Of course. Thank you." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please." She sat. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers gently linked. "I'm told you submitted something unusual during today's exercise," he began. Clara's heart flickered. She didn't answer immediately. "I wasn't sure what the right thing was," she said softly. "But I knew what the wrong thing felt like." He studied her for a moment. "Then, tell me what you mean." Clara paused. "I read someone's file," she began. "It wasn't perfect. There were things they could have done better. But I could tell it was real. They weren't trying to impress. They were trying to serve." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "I couldn't justify marking them down just so I'd look better." There was silence. Not awkward, thoughtful. Mr. Camden leaned back slightly, steepling his fingers. "Do you believe the others chose differently?" Clara hesitated. "I don't know. But some of them talked like this was a zero-sum game." His gaze didn't waver. "And is it no?" Clara said after a beat. "Not when we're building something bigger than ourselves." Mr. Camden's eyes crinkled faintly at the corners. "You remind me," he said slowly, "of someone I once hired." He rose, walked to the kettle, and poured hot water into 2 cups. The scent of chamomile filled the room. He offered her one. Clara accepted it with a quiet, "Thank you." He sat again, more gently this time. "There's a truth we often forget in rooms like these," he said. "The higher the stakes, the louder the masks." Clara tilted her head, "And the quieter the truth." He smiled. "Exactly." Then his tone shifted subtly firmer. "Do you think kindness has a place in competition?" Clara took a slow breath. "I think kindness is what makes the competition worth winning, even if it costs you, especially if it does." A long pause followed. "You understand that others will always be louder, flashier, more certain of their entitlement." "Yes," Clara said, "but entitlement isn't the same as worth." The words settled between them like dust in golden light. Mr. Camden studied her again longer this time, not sizing her up, but seeing something. Then he opened the drawer of his desk. He pulled out a thin folder and placed it between them. "Inside, this is a draft of your full review from today's panel. You can read it, if you like." Clara blinked. I do something wrong." He shook his head, quite the opposite. She hesitated, then slowly opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the page. Phrases caught her breath, unpolished but unusually thoughtful. "Lacks presentation tools, but speaks from conviction. Unremarkable resume. Remarkable presence. She looked up, unsure of what to say. You stood out. Miss Whitmore, Mr. Camden said, his voice low, not because you pushed others down, but because you didn't. He rose and walked toward the window again. The city shimmered behind him like something far away. I'll ask you one more thing, he said without turning. If tomorrow you were given the opportunity to lead, to make decisions that affected people's futures, and no one would know your name, would you still do it? Clara didn't pause. Yes. Why? Because it's not about being seen, she said quietly. It's about being able to see clearly. He turned back to her. For the first time, his face softened fully. Not with approval, but recognition. Thank you, Clara, he said. You may return to your room. She stood slowly, heart thudding. Can I ask, who are you? Exactly. He smiled. Someone who still believes that character is louder than credentials. Clara nodded. Then I'm glad you're here. She stepped out of the room, the door closing gently behind her. Inside, Mr. Camden sat down, folded his hands, and whispered, So am I. The next morning, the final day of evaluation dawned crisp and cold. A light frost clung to the edges of the building's glass panels as candidates filed into the auditorium, some groggy, others buzzing with quiet excitement. The air inside was different, heavy, expectant. Clara sat toward the back, her notebook balanced on her lap. She hadn't told anyone about her meeting with Mr. Camden. She wasn't even sure it had happened the way she remembered. The conversation had felt more like a test than a talk, but something about his presence lingered. On stage, Lena appeared first, her clipboard clutched to her chest, her eyes more serious than usual. Good morning, she said. Before we proceed with final decisions, we have a special guest joining us. Murmurs stirred. No one had ever joined at this stage before. Then the doors at the back of the auditorium opened. He walked in without ceremony, no entourage, no introduction. Just the man Clara had met the night before. But something had shifted. The casual cardigan was gone. Now. He wore a navy blue jacket with a subtle lapel pin, one that gleamed with the Holland Tech insignia. He moved to the center of the stage with quiet authority. The room, slowly, went silent. Good morning, he said. My name is Samuel Camden Holland. A collective breath was held. Gasps broke through. The billionaire, the ghost founder, the reclusive architect of Holland Tech himself. Clara sat perfectly still, her chest tightening. He continued. You've heard of me in articles what few exist. You've read about this foundation, how it's awarded scholarships to thousands. But today, I'm not here as a founder. I'm here as an observer. He walked slowly along the edge of the stage. Over the last 3 days, we've watched more than presentations. We've watched values. We've listened not just to words, but to silence. Not just to resumes, but to responses when things didn't go your way. His voice remained soft, but firm. Too often, people confuse polish with power, eloquence with ethics, performance with presence. His gaze swept the room. A few of you walked in, expecting to conquer. A few expected to be handed something. And some showed us something else entirely. He turned toward the side screen. A moment passed. Then a slide appeared, an image of a handwritten note. Clara's heart jumped. It was hers. This candidate may lack polish, but the heart behind this application is rare. I recommend a second review. There's something real here. The room went silent. Integrity, Holland said, is choosing honesty when no one is watching. That's what Miss Clara Whitmore demonstrated yesterday. Every eye turned toward her, some confused, some stunned, some ashamed. Clara felt her face flush, but she didn't lower her eyes. She had the lowest technical resources of anyone in this cohort. Holland continued, no formal slides, no devices, and yet she had the highest peer review score in ethical decision-making. He paused. Let it land. Her presence reminded us of what this program is meant to be, not a reward for privilege, but a responsibility for those who carry purpose. He stepped forward again. And so, I'm pleased to announce that Miss Whitmore will be awarded the Holland Leadership Fellowship, full mentorship and funding, effective immediately. The room stirred, a few clapped, then more, then all. But Holland held up a hand. There's more. The applause faded. He turned toward the candidates. For those who laughed at others for what they wore, for those who whispered about someone's lack of tech gear, know this: you didn't fail a test. You revealed who you are. Several students looked down. Some looked away. Holland's voice softened. And that's okay, because growth begins at the edge of discomfort. You're not here to impress. You're here to learn. And that includes learning from your own arrogance. He nodded once. To those who chose self-preservation over truth, your actions are not disqualifications, but mirrors. Look into them. Decide who you want to be. The silence was thick. Then he turned once more to Clara. Miss Whitmore, he said, we'd like you to say a few words. If you're willing. Clara's breath caught. Then she rose, slowly, walked down the aisle, stepped onto the stage. The microphone was taller than she expected. She adjusted it quietly. Then she looked out at the room, not with triumph, but with clarity. I came here not knowing if I belonged, she said, and many of you helped confirm that feeling. A ripple of discomfort moved through the seats, but I stayed, not to prove myself to you, but to prove something to me. She paused. I don't have the polish, I don't have the pedigree, but I do have purpose. And then, the most important line, if we only make room for the loudest, the richest, the most prepared, then we'll never hear the voices that have the most to say. She stepped back. Holland clapped once. Everyone followed. And somewhere, in the back row, someone whispered, she didn't win because she was better. She won because she was brave. 2 months later, the hills of Elmsworth, Kentucky, rolled golden beneath an early autumn sun. The barn behind the Whitmore house had been cleared out. Hay bales moved, cobwebs swept, lights strung from the rafters. It wasn't for a party. It was for a classroom. Inside, 6 children sat in mismatched chairs, hunched over tables lined with loaned Chromebooks. A whiteboard leaned against an old feed barrel. The handwriting on it read, "Today's lesson, what is a microprocessor?" At the front, Clara stood in her usual button-up shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her notebook was open beside her, but she wasn't reading from it. She never did. She taught the way she had lived, clear, calm, hands-on. Henry, now 10, sat cross-legged at the edge of the group, chewing on the cap of a marker. He raised his hand. "Sis," he asked, "what if you mess up the code and the whole thing crashes?" Clara smiled. "Then you've just learned one more way not to build a computer." The kids laughed. Out by the porch, a dusty black SUV pulled into the gravel drive. June Whitmore stood from her rocking chair, brushing flour from her apron. She squinted against the light. The man who stepped out wore a flannel shirt, jeans, and hiking boots. He carried nothing but a smile and a folded brochure. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his head, "is this the Whitmore place?" June nodded. "Depends who's asking." He chuckled. "Name's Samuel Holland." June raised an eyebrow. "Well, I'll be. You're taller than you look on the news." He grinned. "Less polished, too." She waved him toward the barn. "She's in there. Won't stop teaching, even when the cows wander in." Holland stepped into the makeshift classroom quietly. He didn't interrupt. He stood at the back, leaning against the barn door, watching Clara explain how computers communicate with each other like pen pals across wires. There was no projection screen, no sound system, but every kid's eyes were locked on hers. He waited until class ended. When the kids had left and Clara began stacking chairs, he finally spoke. "You didn't tell me you'd start here." Clara turned, surprised. "I didn't think you'd come all this way." "I didn't come for you," he said gently. "I came for the idea of you." She tilted her head, amused. "That sounds like something you say at tech conferences." He chuckled. "Maybe, but it's true." They walked together toward the porch. The sky was streaked with orange and lavender. Birds trilled in the distance, and somewhere nearby, Someone was burning wood. Clara sat on the porch steps. Holland joined her. He reached into his jacket and handed her a thin folder. "Proposal draft," he said. "The Holland Rural Tech Initiative. We're building satellite programs across underfunded counties. We'd like you to lead the pilot." Clara didn't open it. Not yet. She looked out across the fields instead. "Why me?" He didn't answer right away. "Then, because you never asked to be chosen. You simply chose well." There was silence. Then Clara spoke again, her voice softer. "Do you ever wonder how many people never get the chance? How many good hearts don't fill out the application because they think it's not for them?" He nodded. "I do." She turned to him. "Then let's change the application." His eyes narrowed with curiosity. "What do you mean, no photos, no fancy videos, just questions? Questions that show who someone is, not what they've been given." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Done. Weeks passed, then months. The initiative launched. Applications poured in from single moms in Appalachia to veterans in rural Arizona, to high schoolers who coded on borrowed phones in community centers, and each of them was evaluated without filters, without names, without bias. Clara led the charge quietly. She didn't move to a city. She didn't buy a new wardrobe. She stayed in Elmsworth, built the center behind her house, drove to nearby towns with her old canvas bag and a box of used routers in the trunk. Everywhere she went, she left behind something simple belief, that they mattered, that they were seen, that the system wasn't just for the loud and lucky. 1 year later, the New York Times ran a story titled "The Quiet Architect of Fairness." Clara Whitmore's Code of Integrity photos showed her standing beside a chalkboard in boots, shaking hands with a retired farmer who'd learned to build a website for his produce business. Samuel Holland's name barely appeared, but he didn't mind. He knew this had never been his story. It was hers. On a quiet morning, back in the Whitmore kitchen, Clara poured 2 mugs of coffee. Her grandmother sat by the window, knitting a scarf for Henry. "I still don't get it," she muttered. "All this, and you didn't change a bit." Clara smiled. "Maybe I just became more of who I already was." The old woman nodded slowly. "Well," she said, "next time they laugh at your clothes, you tell them this." Clara looked up. "Tell them," her grandmother said, "you're dressing for the kind of work that actually matters." And Clara laughed clear, full, unafraid. Because now, she believed it too. In a world that often celebrates the loudest, the flashiest, and the most well-connected, Clara Whitmore reminded us of something we too easily forget. Dignity doesn't wear designer, integrity doesn't need a spotlight, and kindness, it doesn't ask for permission. She didn't win by being louder, she won by being real, by choosing fairness when it would have been easier to stay silent, by helping others even when no one would have blamed her for looking the other way. But not everyone gets that chance. Too many are dismissed because of where they come from, what they wear, or how quietly they speak. Let's be honest, how often do we do the same? This story is a tribute to every overlooked voice, to every quiet fighter, and to the courage it takes to stay kind in an unkind room. If this story moved you even just a little, take a moment, like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next story that just might change the way you see the world. Because sometimes, the smallest voice leaves the deepest echo.